Hi, I'm a Forza YouTuber, and I haven't played Forza in about a year, almost. Which sounds kinda weird when you think about it, but there's an explanation for it. Well, actually there are two explanations, one long and one short. If you'd like to hear the short explanation, then truth is, I make videos mostly for my own fun and enjoyment, but also for you guys to enjoy, of course. Yet, I don't really enjoy this game anymore. Well, I mean, I haven't enjoyed it in a while actually, even when I was still producing content for it. However, back then I didn't find the game boring enough to not put myself through a bit of boredom to give you all some content to watch. It's not that I'm not making Forza videos anymore. In fact, I've still got a few ideas lying around here and there for some last hurrahs of Horizon 4 content, you could call them. However, I would also like to take this chance to say that if you've got any suggestions of games you'd like to see me play on my channel, especially, but not limited to, racing games, drop them down in the comment section below. It's not like I exclusively play Forza anyways. Either way, we're deviating a bit here, so let's get back to the main point of the video. The short version of why I stopped playing Horizon 4 was because I think the game is very boring right now. The long explanation goes over why I think it's boring and how I think it could be fixed, which, as I'm sure you could tell from the title, is what I'll go over throughout the rest of the video. The PI system.
The game is not fun. If it's not fun, why bother?
So for one to be able to understand why Horizon 4's PI system is its biggest downfall, they must first be able to understand what it is and why it's so important to not only be in the game, but to get its inclusion right. PI stands for Performance Index, and the reasoning behind its inclusion into the Forza franchise is quite logical, really. You don't want a Miata to be racing against the Ford GT, so you need some sort of rating system to judge a car based on its performance and put it up against similarly performing cars. I'd like you all to especially keep this last part in mind, that the PI system's main purpose is to bridge the gap between performance for cars and therefore allow better racing by pitting similarly performing cars against one another. This is because the reason why Horizon 4 is essentially so boring is because it's a racing game where the racing is just really bad. Races are extremely uneventful 90% of the time, and it's all due to the PI system not really doing its job correctly. Not that it's anything new, mind you. I'm a latecomer to the Horizon series, and Forza as a whole, actually. My first racing game that I remember was Gran Turismo 4 for the PS2, back in 2007, after which I was completely ignorant about cars until a hill climb event sparked my interest again in 2017, the year in which I got my introduction to the Forza series in the shape of Horizon 3 for the PC. So unfortunately this does mean I lost out on experiencing previous Forza titles, such as Motorsport 4 or Horizon 2. And as such I cannot provide you guys with any info regarding the way PI worked in those games. I can, however, tell you that arriving in Horizon 3, it was already a huge mess. And while it got better in Horizon 4, I can assure you that it is still far from perfect. Which brings us to the main point of today's video. No, I won't be going over how I'd make Horizon's PI system perfect, but I'm pretty sure I can come up with something that's close enough, or at least better than what we currently have.
Less than 8 seconds he's away, but the right rear flies off, scattering other mechanics.
We're starting off with what is arguably the biggest, most radical change of them all, but also the most important one, which will lay the foundation for the rest: the tires. If you've been following the Horizon games for a while, you'll know that the tires in these games are completely broken and have always been the core reason as to why some players can so easily cheat the PI system and create such a massive gap in performance between other cars with exactly the same PI. If you need some examples of just how bad Forza handles tires in their games, in Horizon 2, rally tires performed worse on dirt than race tires. And meanwhile in Horizon 3, stock tires would give you more than enough grip for racing most of the time, allowing you to make extremely brain-dead high downforce power builds that would leave everything in the dust in the many straights of Horizon 3 and the very few corners that game even had. Not only that, but putting tire compounds on your car would take up so much PI that it's almost as if the game was punishing you for building your car the way you're meant to. Which brings us to Horizon 4, where all of these issues were improved upon, but unfortunately still somewhat exist. And we're also not helped by the inclusion of drag tires, for example, a completely unnecessary tire compound, which just helps you further find ways to cheat the tuning process. So my main issue is the following. There are too many unnecessary tire choices which do more harm than good, and using the various percented compounds as intended takes too much PI, while using them in ways the game did not intend you to, such as making road racing builds using rally or drag tires, actually rewards you. So, here's my proposed fix. First of all, we make tires not add any PI. This might sound a bit crazy for now, but trust me, there's a valid explanation behind it. As it stands, tires are treated as an upgrade to your car, which in itself is pretty standard. However, the fact that they cost PI simply opens up too much of an opportunity for someone else to abuse in their favor by dumping all of their PI into power instead, while taking advantage of Forza's poor tire physics to still keep their grip, something the game clearly doesn't want you to do. By making all of the tire options cost 0 PI, we're effectively changing them from being an upgrade to being more of a way to specialize your car to do something. A side grade, if you will. If you want to tune your car for asphalt or drag racing, then you've got no excuse to not pick the grippy asphalt tires. If you want your car to go off-road, then rally tires should be a no-brainer. And if you want your car to just behave normally as it would stock, or to drift, then stock tires will be good enough. You'll also notice here that I only mentioned 3 types of tires, which is yet another change one could consider a bit odd, but makes sense, at least in my eyes. Again, we'll be replacing the role of tires as an upgrade and turning them into a way to specialize your car. With this said, there's only 3 things you want to tune your car for: asphalt grip, off-road racing, and drifting or just being stock. So these are the only tire choices you'll need, really. But what I do want to go over is how these tires perform on all types of surfaces. On your screen you should see a graph explaining the behavior of each tire. Obviously the percentages could change here and there. These are mostly here as random placeholder values to explain my point. If you thought these reworks were far too complicated, then you'll be delighted to know that there's one last layer of depth to them. Tire performance will change and adapt to your car depending on its class. This means that, for example, asphalt tires on a B-class car will offer different levels of grip compared to the same compound on an S1 class car. The compound also changes depending on how you tune the car. So if you start off with a B-class car and tune it to A-class, your tires will also become A-class. This is to prevent the lower classes from having too much grip and the higher classes from having too little due to the difference in power to weight ratios in these classes, which brings us nicely to our next point. One of Forza's strongest selling points is its immense car variety, coupled with the amount of customization each car has. The amount of content is just immense, and it keeps getting bigger with not only each release, but every update that release gets. However, it does come at a cost. Having a lot of cars might come off as a purely good thing, but that's a lot of cars you'll have to balance out with an already faulty PI system. 4 cylinders, V8s, front-wheel drives, all-wheel drives, front engine, mid-engine. That's a lot of variables the game has to take into account to make sure each and every one of its cars is reliable at some sort of class. And of course it should come as little to no surprise that the game simply can't do this. You can brag about having hundreds of cars in your game, but what's the point if the meta is emphasized in such a way that it only encourages a dozen of them in online racing? All-wheel drive, Forza Aero, and engine swaps rule the game, as well as a handful of cars who have their PI placed far lower than what they should have. This doesn't create close racing, and consequently it doesn't create a fun game. I've come across a lot of people who sort of spoke out against the cars which I picked to drive, saying they're not competitive in the meta, or that I should have given it a bunch of upgrades to pretty much make it handle and perform just like a meta car. Now, I've got nothing against the way you choose to play the game. There's some stuff I don't particularly support, but I won't be wishing death upon someone for winning a race in a bone shaker. But I think that when you're winning 90% of your races because you're abusing a game's broken system, versus people who are just, trying to play the game the way it was meant to be played, I think you should, at the very least, start considering what all these victories really do mean to you. considering, you've barely ever had any competition. At the end of the day, it's a casual game, and games are meant to be played to have fun, not to win. And I think the real winner is the guy in second place who's having the time of his life battling it out against someone in third in just a good old balanced car, as opposed to the dude in first place who spent the entire race by himself and has been driving the same car for about 4 hours. Give that a thought. Either way, I've honestly got no idea how Forza judges a car's performance and gives it its corresponding PI, but judging by the fact that a Bone Shaker and a Renault Clio can race each other, something's clearly wrong here, so let's start laying some foundations. Firstly, I don't think Forza itself acknowledges just how much of an advantage the all-wheel drive drivetrain gives you in this game, given how most all-wheel drive swaps don't increase PI as much as they should in comparison to two-wheel drive cars, and sometimes even lowers it. I think this is due to the fact that all-wheel drive is the heaviest drivetrain of the three available in the game, and therefore the game assumes that by making the car heavier, it will perform worse, completely undermining all of the advantages that sending power to all four wheels gives you, namely a much better launch, better acceleration out of certain corners, improved grip on dirt, and most importantly, ease of control. You could argue that in real life, all-wheel drive isn't always the way to go, because sometimes it makes the car too heavy or understeer too much, but Forza is not real life, and as such, 90% of the time, it's all-wheel drive or bust, especially with how short the races are. Now there's two ways we could negate the effect of all-wheel drive in this game. First method. We start off by imagining that every car in this game has 0 PI for now, and then look at its drivetrain. If it's all-wheel drive, we give it the highest amount of PI. Just to throw in some random values, we'll give it 50, while either front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive cars get given 20 PI. The reason why front and rear-wheel drive are given the same amount of PI is because honestly, from my understanding, both drivetrains have their pros and cons when it comes to racing in this game. I honestly actually want to make front-wheel drive be worth more PI, because from my experience front-wheel drive cars are just that slight bit better all the way up to A-class. But then again, I admit I am a weirdo who is very biased in favor of front-wheel drives, so I don't trust myself to give that judgment. Either way, only upon being given these flat values will the car get the rest of its PI according to its specs. This way, if you were to want to benefit from the advantages of all-wheel drive, you'd either have to give up a significant amount of straight line speed or corner acceleration in the shape of power. The other way we could do this, however, is the opposite. We first give cars their PI according to their power and weight, and then apply not a flat value depending on their drivetrain, like 50 or 20, but a percentage instead. So for example, if all-wheel drive increased the car's PI by, say, 20%, and all others just by 5%, a 100 PI car would be 120 with all-wheel drive and 105 without, while a 300 PI car would be 360 with and 315 without. Again, these are just placeholder values, but I think the principle in itself is good. Needless to say, this would also apply to drivetrain swaps, and speaking of which... I'm gonna start this off by saying, I don't like swaps. As those who watch me must already know, if it were by me, I wouldn't have nor drivetrain nor engine swaps in Forza, as, for me at least, it not only adds yet another variable to the tuning process to make things go wrong, but it also just defeats the purpose of driving most of the cars in the game. What's the point in driving a good old V8 rear-wheel drive muscle car if you're just gonna V12 all-wheel drive swap it instead, you know? However, taking into account that more people than just me play this game, and that those people might enjoy being able to swap a V8 into an RX-7, I suppose we'll try to include such swaps in a balanced way. We've already went over drivetrains, so let's go over engine swaps and the overall power of the car. As I've said before, the way Forza judges its PI for other cars is extremely vague and convoluted, as it's not really explained anywhere. I mean, you could try to tell me otherwise, but no amount of arguments and counter-arguments will justify a Caterham being 801 PI, while a Bone Shaker gets to chill at 795, or lower if you swap all-wheel drive into it, So with this said, let's start off with the basics. It should come off as a very little surprise that power plays a massive part in racing. If you were to take two cars with the exact same drivetrain and engine layout, but one of them had 500 horsepower while the other had 700, it's a no-brainer that the one with 700 would come out on top. But what if I was hiding something from you? What if I didn't tell you that the car with 700 horsepower weighed about as much as an aircraft carrier, while the other one with 500 had the weight of a feather? Suddenly it's not looking too good for the car with 700 horsepower, is it? Obviously this is an exaggeration, but this is where the notion of power to weight ratio comes in. Horsepower increases your top speed and acceleration, however being able to reach a top speed on paper won't do you any good if in practice your car is too heavy to accelerate to it. Then, yet again, having an excellent acceleration won't exactly do you much good either if all you can accelerate to is a snail's pace, which implies there's some sort of sweet spot you must achieve. But, then again, maybe you don't want that sweet spot. Maybe you want your car to be just a tiny bit better on high-speed tracks, so you make it a bit heavier to allow yourself to squeeze in some more horsepower at the cost of braking distance and acceleration. Or maybe you want to get in and out of those corners just a tiny bit quicker at the cost of some straight line speed, so you give it less weight and therefore less power. However, throughout all of this there is one thing that will remain constant: the power to weight ratio, which I think should be what 90% of your car's PI should be based around, with the other 10% being stuff like engine placement, suspension, and brakes and all that. The key notion that I want to establish here is that you're always gaining something at the cost of something else. You can't have the best power coupled with the best weight, because that would simply be overpowered. Some might argue that all cars of a certain class having the same power to weight ratio would kill variety when it comes to performance, but that's definitely not the case, as like I said, you can choose to sacrifice one of two aspects of your car while still keeping the ratio the same. You just can't have both of them, but they'll still behave differently. Besides, if you're still skeptical about this working, keep in mind that virtually every single race league in the FIA, which is a pretty big thing if you like racing, follows super strict power to weight ratio rules to encourage and allow better racing, as well as having things such as minimum allowed weight or maximum amount of power allowed, which in one hand also could come in handy in Forza, so that you don't have a Plymouth Cuda in B-class with 1500 horsepower. With all of that out of the way, you might be wondering how all of this relates to the swaps mentioned at the beginning. The reason why I brought up power to weight is because certain engine swaps allow you to get more power than others while keeping the PI the same. So for example, while a Miata with a stock engine upgraded to the top of A-class would have, I don't know, 200 horsepower, I'm just throwing numbers here. A Miata with the same PI but a different engine swapped into it would have 250. Now usually this would be offset by the fact that an engine swap would usually come with its own set of downsides, such as added weight, offsetting the overall weight distribution and therefore handling of the car. But you'll find that in Forza, because of its handling model, these downsides are virtually non-existent, and you'll just end up with a flat-out better car for the same PI cost, which, as you may know from what I've told you before, is one of this game's biggest issues and should be avoided at all costs. So what I'm implying here is that no matter which engine you put on your car, if your power to weight ratio changes, your PI changes as well, which might make you think that engine swaps in this case will become kind of pointless, to which the answer is yes, you're right, which is why I've always kind of been against them. However, they won't be entirely pointless. For instance, there's absolutely no way a Miata can get to the top of S1 with its stock engine, which calls for an engine swap. However, for as long as they have the same PI, they'll perform the same, because that's how it should be. To end this long, most likely overly complicated video on a relatively small, simple note, our last topic should be very easy to understand. In Forza, engine upgrades are done via improving select parts of the engine, such as intake, pistons, camshafts, and so on. Some of these upgrades, namely camshafts, turbos, superchargers, and exhausts actually change certain aspects about your car's behavior. However, any other engine part simply serves as a way to get more power and torque, and as such, I feel that their inclusion is somewhat unnecessary. Sure, it's cool to get to upgrade every little part of your car's engine, and sometimes you even get to see what each of them supposedly do, but I don't think someone will start complaining about their immersion being ruined due to the replacement of this upgrade method with something a little more intuitive and fluid. Believe it or not, despite the massive predominance of Forza content on my channel, with the occasional dirt rally, I'm actually a huge fan of the Gran Turismo franchise, and Gran Turismo Sport has been a game that I've found myself enjoying quite a lot. One of the things Gran Turismo Sport allows you to do is tune the amount of power your car has, but instead of following the Forza route of letting you mount parts on your car, it instead uses a slider bar which allows you to adjust just how much power you want your engine to put out. And the best part is this not only lets you upgrade your engine, but also downgrade it to a certain extent in case you'd like to try out a weaker version of your current car in a lower class. However, the main reason as to why I believe a slider bar would be better as opposed to purchasing individual components is to get rid of those moments where you end up either 1 PI above the class you're aiming for or slightly below it. After all, I don't think I'm speaking for myself here, considering the amount of times you've probably tried to tune a car for a certain class, landed around 10 PI below its limit, and just thought to yourself, damn, I really wish I could just get that tiny bit more power, you know? This was a bit of a weird one, I'm sure of it, and it's not that I feel that Forza desperately needs this change in particular, but I do think the game would be just that tiny bit better off with it than without. I guess you could consider this an optional suggestion if you really want to. Also, I'm not saying to make it exactly like Gran Turismo Sport. I kind of want it to be like more of a mix. Like, for example, you get to pick out a turbo upgrade or a higher engine revving upgrade like camshafts, but the rest of the power given to your car will be done via a slider. I'm pickled Forza Horizon 4 is a game that has all of the cards in its deck, but doesn't really know how to use them. I believe that at the time of recording this video, the game has around 700 cars. So I think it speaks volumes that, like I said, the game's balancing only encourages you to use about a handful of them in online races in order to remain competitive and have some sort of semblance of fun racing against other people who have found themselves getting pressured into driving such cars as well. The keyword here is encourages you, however. There is nothing stopping you from picking an off-meta car to use in a race, and likewise there's nothing stopping you from tuning a car in a way that follows said meta. Hell, you might actually have some fun using the same cars over and over again, if that's your thing. But I know for sure that the same can't be said for me, and for a large part of this game's player base, I'm sure of it. I never really paid attention to the Horizon 4 meta, because quite simply, I've always thought the game was a bit too silly and casual to be taken seriously. I mean, this game's player base is rather young, it's clearly not targeted towards an older demographic, and it's clearly marketed as a casual open world arcade racer. So I don't really see the point in playing it so competitively. Going back to the meta statement though, I never really thought of a meta as a healthy thing to have in a video game to begin with, because that implies one piece of content being absurdly good, while the rest is, well, not as good. From my point of view, if you're gonna add something into the game, it has to have a purpose. Otherwise, it's just gonna sit there taking up space and eventually get removed. Even meme cars like the Reliant Robin or the Pulp P50 have their own purposes in the game, even though they're virtually useless. I just feel bad for the cars that are useless not on purpose, but because this game is built in such a way that it renders them obsolete. I am well aware that the changes I propose are very radical, and highly unlikely to get implemented into the game, let alone actually reach anyone from the Playground Games team. However, these ideas are something I've been thinking of for quite a while now, and I've really wanted to put them out there and see what everyone else's opinions on them would be. So, if you've got some ideas of your own or would like to give your take on mine, feel free to share them down below. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video, whenever that is.